Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of DFO Rundown Insider Edition. I'm Irfaan and Gaffar. This show is presented by Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. You all know him as the fourth period on X. I know him as David Pagnotta, one of my very good friends. David, how are you?
I'm good. I'm better than a couple teams on our side of the pond, but or border, but doing pretty well.
Let's start with the West Coast, the best coast, where I live in Vancouver. Not so best right now for the Vancouver Canucks, who have lost 2 straight games, and now it's being reported that Thatcher Demko, their ace, their number one goalie, a guy that they just gave $25 million to, is out reportedly for 2 to 3 weeks with a new injury, not an injury related to his previous knee injury, and not an injury related to the maintenance days that he took over the weekend that caused him to not be in the lineup for the Canucks back-to-back games, Dave.
Yeah, not the best of scenarios. Kevin Lankinen needs to step up, not stink. That'd help their chances a little bit. So we'll see kind of, how things kind of progress for the Vancouver Canucks. But there was a little bit of hesitancy with respect to exactly what Thatcher Demko was dealing with, if he was dealing with anything. Was this part of their plan to kind of give him some time off throughout the season in certain points of the season? He clearly, from my understanding, wants to be in there, wants to play, wants to be given basically the keys to it. And unfortunately, for him, aggravated clearly his knee in some fashion on Tuesday night. And here we are. He's going to miss some action, miss a few weeks. 2 to 3 weeks usually, all of these injuries, usually you got to add a couple days to it. They got to practice. They got to get back into the swing of things. So you're effectively losing them for a few weeks here. And now, as I said, you need Lankinen to really step up here between the pipes.
So let's call it a month, give or take. In reality, with what we know, the history with injuries and what goes on with the Vancouver Canucks, he last played in a full NHL game on Monday. That would be last week against the Nashville Predators on the road, and then played only a period against the Winnipeg Jets. And in that period, Dave, he looked slow. He looked not very sharp post to post. Angles are obviously the most difficult things, and real goaltender movements. Look, I'm not a goalie guy. I don't claim to be a goalie guy, but I can watch games and tell you that Thatcher Demko didn't look like Thatcher Demko for 20 minutes. So there's definitely something to monitor there with Vancouver. But in respects to teams and goalies, like, what's the market like? And do you think the Canucks might be a team that would be interested in maybe acquiring a goaltender somehow?
I think, first of all, with Demko, as I said, he wants to play. This was the first offseason that he's had in years where he went into it healthy and had a normal offseason regimen, a normal summer workout schedule on and off the ice. He was excited and jacked to hit this season up. And, they've decided collectively to kind of go through this little schedule of his where it gives him a little bit of time off. It gives him those quote unquote maintenance days to kind of, not overdo it, so to speak, and possibly aggravate some injuries. And obviously, well, look what happened. I don't think, like, we all know the Canucks are already in the market for a center. They've been in the market for a center since almost the start of the season. Basically, they upped those efforts when Filip Chytil went out. Obviously, they haven't figured it out. So we know that they're already in the market for help up front. I don't know, or if I don't see a scenario, unless something totally falls into their lap, or if Kevin Lankinen gets hurt, where they're not going to ride Lankinen right now for the foreseeable future until Demko's ready to go. They have Patera to back up for now. I think that's the direction that they're going to go in. The goalie market right now isn't very hot. There aren't too many viable options unless you're making a considerable type of trade. There are some veterans that may be out there. Alex Gorgiev in Buffalo's available. But do you want to add another goalie to the mix for a short stretch? I don't know if that's what they want to do, guys.
Especially if the Canucks really don't know where they are or what type of team they're going to be, right? I think that you go into these next few weeks, you're going to be without Thatcher Demko. American Thanksgiving is right around the corner, where you kind of look at yourself as a team and say, can we get through where we are in the standings and work our way back up? Or is this where we are? Are we a bottom of the pack team? Maybe a little bit of a middle of the pack team. So the Canucks very quickly have to decide that. Also, Quinn Hughes leaving the game with an injury, came back into the game for the Vancouver Canucks. We all know Filipino. You mentioned re-aggravated knee. Not entirely sure if it is the knee. We know it's lower body injury, obviously, for Thatcher Demko. Okay, from the Best Coast to the West Coast to the East Coast, which kind of is Vancouver East right now with the disaster that is happening with the Toronto Maple Leafs. David, what is going on with the Buds?
They can't get it together. They can't figure things out. Clearly, Captain Obvious, but like that's their situation right now. They've been looking, and their situation is even tougher. They have no cap space to play with. So they're figuring out, as we're recording this, they're figuring out David Kampf's situation, which, speaking to some people on the team, they don't feel it's that big of a deal right now, but clearly it is if there's that much attention that's being put towards it. That situation, I'm told from both sides, is amicable, but they figured that this would have been resolved by the end of the weekend. It hasn't. They're still, as we're doing this, they're still figuring it out. I suspect they'll get an answer or some type of resolution out of this either later today or tomorrow. So there may be an update pretty soon here on that situation. But even outside of that, they still have too many bodies. They are looking for a top six guy. They don't have the cap space to do it, so it's going to take a little bit of creativity. Some guys are all up and down the lineup, like obviously Nick Robertson and Max Domi and so on. So they're trying to figure out placement here. They don't have a facilitator, first of all, and obviously Mitch Marner was that for them. He's in Vegas. He's a thing of the past for them right now. But they don't have anybody that stepped up in that regard. And defensively, it's a bit of a mess. Like, they're not playing well. They don't have a puck mover out on the back end either. But it's everyone's just in flux, and it's adding a little bit more frustration. And losing to Boston again, on Tuesday night certainly doesn't help. They're going to have to deal with a red-hot LA Kings team, red-hot on the road anyway, LA Kings team that's coming in on Thursday. This is a tough battle for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And now you couple that with, injuries to Austin Matthews and, Stolarz. We're going to get an update on that. We should have some type of update, this evening or later today. But everything that's supposed to go wrong for the Leafs, is right now going pretty wrong.
Yeah, I believe Austin Matthews having an MRI on Wednesday for an injury. Yep. Obviously, we all saw the hit from Nikita Zadorov, and then Anthony Stolarz, didn't play. He got pulled. They said it was an upper body injury, so obviously he tweaked something and will be evaluated again. The Leafs don't play till Thursday, I believe. But Dave, when you look at it, just trading someone for the sake of trading them isn't going to work with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So they wanted to find someone, and it's interesting you mentioned that. How has no one grabbed the game or grabbed a hold of that position in the top six? You mentioned the influx of bodies that they do have. They've got too many guys. How has no one in those too many guys been able to grab that top six position? Why hasn't it worked?
No one's been able to find a comfortable zone there. And again, even if you want to give Easton Cowan a bit of a run here, they don't have the cap space to make all of these pieces fit, which is why, they're trying to move out some bodies and are going to continue to listen. If they do anything impactful, they're going to have to move dollars out. And if they really up their efforts to try to bring in somebody that can kind of help stabilize that top six, you're probably going to hear names like Max Domi and Brandon Carlo a lot more. And it may not be now, it may be later on in the season, but those are two names that have been floated out recently, as recently as the offseason. And we know Carlo was their, acquisition ahead of the deadline, with Fraser Minton being the main piece going back to Boston. But, he may simply be just a casualty of too many bigger salaries. And it's not like he's making an astronomical amount, but if they want to do anything to augment this roster, they're going to have to move money out. And that's why we're going to hear, outside of, the again, Camp situation and Robertson's name and Yarncrook's name, out there that have been out there since the summer. If they do anything impactful, you're going to be hearing Domi and you're going to be hearing Carlo's name.
We're in two.
It wouldn't surprise me if they try to do something either within a direct deal or a side piece deal where they've got to move out money in order to bring in a key piece.
We are in two markets where when the sky falls, oh boy, Dave, does it really fall in Vancouver and Toronto. Yeah. Let's go down the road from Toronto to the Detroit Red Wings. They've lost 4 of 5. The Yzer plan, I'm not entirely sure what is going on with the Detroit Red Wings at this point. I know that there was some interest in defenseman Erik Gustafsson from the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers wanted Detroit to retain some salary on Gustafsson, and obviously that didn't happen. So that's why nothing really happened there. But what's the latest with the Detroit Red Wings, and are they willing to move on from people? Are they looking to acquire people? I mean, what's happening in Motor City?
I think they're coming back down to earth a little bit.
Yeah.
They went on that nice heater. They went on that stretch, and then, things have kind of just fallen out for them, or evened out. Excuse me, I should say. So the way that they're looking at this is with a patient lens. They don't want to rush too much into adding. They don't want to rush too much into moving guys out. But if this is where they're at, if this is where this team is going to be for the duration of the season, which is, I don't know what like a wild card bubble team, decent strides because you're seeing some of your younger kids getting more ice time, learning the game a lot more at the NHL level, and then being to exploit those experiences for better later. But the more that this continues, the more we're going to hear of guys like Compher and Kopp in terms of the trade market. Now, they've got a little bit of no trade protection on each. In addition to those defensemen that you mentioned, you mentioned Gustafsson, Hamonic being another, but I think up front, you're going to hear the Kopps and the Comfers a little bit more moving forward here late, as the season kind of moves along. Again, no trade protection. They both have term left on their contract. I think one has a year, another has 2. But this is going to be an interesting scenario to see how Steve Yzerman kind of navigates this, because this team needs to start taking those next steps. They need to do what the Canadians have done, what the Blackhawks are doing, what the Ducks are doing. It's time for Detroit to start making those types of strides and those types of incline type of movement. So you're going to hear them. The other one that I'm interested in, or if you mentioned the goalie market off the top, Cam Talbot, last year of his deal, UFA next summer, no trade protection. If I'm the Oilers and things continue to ride in that direction, maybe that's a call worth making, maybe a bit of a reunion, so to speak, to get Talbot, there. Or if I'm another team that's looking to solidify the goaltending position, Talbot will be a candidate later on in the season, going closer to the trade deadline. Again, all of this is dependent on just really what the hell the Red Wings are at the moment. Again, I like the fact that the younger guys are gaining this experience, are starting to connect a little bit with one another and all of that fun stuff. But it's like 5 guys.
Dave,
you got a full team here.
They haven't made the playoffs since 2015-16. And they haven't even been anywhere close to making the playoffs probably since 2015-16. So you stockpile a lot of draft picks. You get some pretty good players on your roster, and you have to hope that, you start to trend in the right direction. You mentioned they were off to a good start and a hot start. Things kind of regressed to the mean a little bit. But there has to be more, and there has to be more very soon. I know the Detroit Red Wings fan base has probably been pretty patient with this plan as to what's going on. But at some point, you got to make some strides. Even the Pistons are playing good. Like, you have to get back to that level of excellency at some point here, or at least competing for that in Detroit. Do you not?
No, 100%. Mediocrity is not going to do it in Motor City. And with everything that this team has gone through with respect to this Yzer plan / rebuild, now's the time. He tried to insulate this roster and some young guys with those veteran pieces like Kopp and everyone, but it just hasn't worked out. And, the way the league, like 2 years ago, nobody's taking on those contracts. Nowadays, because of the cap space and the way that everything's going up, those contracts, those AAVs are a lot more palatable. Now, at the same time, what are you getting for these guys? Like, you're not
That's
going to
the
get
thing.
star power coming back or top tier young kids coming back into it. This is going to be a package of, prospect and pick, most likely. But the prospect isn't going to be, upper echelon. He's going to be, depth, bottom six plateau kind of player, which is fine because I think the mindset for this would be move out money, gain more assets, try to package those assets down the road, maybe around draft time, for a team that might, be looking for that and is looking to move out a player himself, an asset himself, and then spend some money in the offseason to bring in skill talent to complement the young guys. You don't
I mean,
necessarily need the grinders and the two-way type of guys on that team right now.
how are you selling Detroit though? Like, who's the young stud? How are you selling this team?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what Yzerman gets paid for, so
But like,
they
what
could figure it out. But
potential free agents are going to look at the Detroit Red Wings and say, "You haven't been to the playoffs in 10 years, and you expect me to come there and change everything?" With what you said, and
yeah,
you mentioned, insulating the roster with some veteran guys, and I understand are some veteran guys that have been there that have gone obviously and won the ultimate prize, but I mean that's a team where as much as you are trying to get younger, you're getting a lot older faster. Are you not?
yeah, no, you are, and that's the thing. Like, Alex DeBrincat, for example, has another year left on his contract before hitting UFA status.
Mhm.
So, you know, you got to make a bunch of different decisions here. It's not just letting the young kids play and then bringing in other guys. It's also, well, who's going to stay with this group for the long haul? Yeah, the captain's locked in, and you've got Mo Sider and you've got Lucas Raymond, and those are the guys that you have to really sell, to others to come by to be like, look, these are our key pieces. These are our horses. We need you to join these guys and kind of run with them, because we feel you're complimentary and this, that, and the other, and we can start taking those next steps. But it's a matter of just the entire roster, together. I mentioned Talbot being a UFA. Well, then they have John Gibson for another year. With all due respect, I think his primetime game is a little bit behind him. There are a lot of questions that need to be figured out here in Detroit. And maybe they go back on another run. Maybe they go back on a heater. I know people like to, crap all over veteran coaches. Todd McClellan's a good coach.
Yep.
You have to have the right pieces in place in order to win. And, clearly they need to add some pieces. Again, maybe they keep this going. Maybe they stay in the hunt. Maybe they're part of the wild card run, which is where, quite frankly, I expected them to be this season. But you need to show those signs of life, game in and game out from a variety of different guys, and they're getting some of it. But in terms of being a legitimate, surefire playoff contender, there's still work that needs to be done, and I think they're going to start to explore some of those options even more.
I think a guy that kind of fell into a great situation. You mentioned Todd McClellan being a good coach is Sheldon Keefe in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
I think that
A lot of
team
skill there.
maybe wasn't ready a couple of years ago and is now right where their Stanley Cup window is about to be wide open. You mentioned a lot of skill and the New Jersey Devils, but obviously the Detroit Red Wings, have playoff aspirations. The New Jersey Devils team has Stanley Cup aspirations. So for them and
Mm-hmm.
Tom Fitzgerald and obviously their management group, at what point do you look to the market and say, we need to add now?
I think they're kind of in that mindset right now where they're
Mhm.
starting to explore what options are available to them. And look, Fitzgerald is not afraid to make a big splash, or to go out there and make a big move. I think he's proven a lot of that. From a trade, or at least on free agency, from a trade perspective, um, I think they're starting to do their due diligence. They may have already started a week or so ago, maybe even prior to that. But basically, trying to understand what the market is. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about like a guy like Blake Coleman, former Devil, now in Calgary with another year on his contract, being a fantastic complementary piece for a Stanley Cup contender like New Jersey. I think that's the case. I think he's on their radar. I think he's on a few teams' radars. But at the same time, there is still an opportunity and a willingness to go for a big fish. And I'm very curious to see, and that seems to be the word around the league is keep an eye on New Jersey. They're willing to do that. That being said, it takes a lot of money to bring in top quality talent. And a name that we heard in June and over parts of the summer was Dougie Hamilton. And he's got a $9 million cap hit. I'm very curious to see what happens there with him. It may not be now. It may be in the offseason. I may be, kind of jumping the gun here a little bit. But if they bring in a big time talent, especially up front, and it's going to cost a lot of money, I wonder what the future holds there for Dougie Hamilton, who has, I believe, a 10-team trade list this season. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Devils at the very least explore some options here, move money out in one side, bring in more money on the other. And maybe it's part of the same deal. We're talking that, we're obviously talking big blockbuster here. But I think they're going to explore all of their options and again, see what's available. There are a lot of teams that we've talked about over the last few weeks that wouldn't shock anybody if they're going after big fish. And that's Carolina, that's Utah, that's Ottawa, that's the Canadians to a certain extent, and Anaheim to a certain extent as well. I'm throwing New Jersey right in that mix because I think there's a willingness to do it, Irf. Obviously, we got to wait and see what happens here. And it's not like Fitzy's out there like, desperately trying to make this happen, but he's keeping that option open. And again, if he goes in this direction, I do wonder about the future of Dougie Hamilton with that no trade clause modified this year. That $9 million cap hit. How many $9 million defensemen do you want on your team right now? Luke Hughes?
True.
I think that's a little bit of a factor, but I think it's more so geared towards if we have an opportunity to bring in a really big stud up front that can really stabilize this top six and just push us over the edge, and it means Hamilton and his $9 million AAV have to be a casualty of that, I think they're willing to explore that.
I can think of a couple names, won't say them, but of guys that, could go there that have won at the highest level and been very, very productive at the highest level that could definitely put that team over the edge. But when you look at it from the New Jersey Devils point of view, you mentioned Dougie Hamilton. If in fact he does, whenever it is, become a casualty, who knows? He might be there for the next 3 seasons, and this could all just be a moot point on us just talking about it. But can they win without it? Like, how much does Dougie Hamilton mean to that team if you're taking a pretty good defenseman off that blue line and replacing him with a guy up front? Because you still have to defend.
Yeah, well, yeah, you do, and that's that's what they have to figure out is if we are moving that piece out, is there an opportunity to not necessarily, you're not going to replace Dougie Hamilton, but can you cushion that blow on that back end and help out Jacob Markstrom and help out the rest of that decor, back there? I'm not suggesting they're moving him out a $9 million player and they're bringing in a $9 million player, but they need to have that cap flexibility. Yeah, that's going to be tough. There aren't that many $9 million players fully available, and this may take a little bit of finessing. And who knows? At the same time, they may look at this and say, okay, we've got $10 million to play with if we move out Dougie Hamilton. Do we go 5-5? Do we go 6-4? How do we help out? Are there opportunities to bring in a player? And our team's willing to retain a little bit on some of their deals. Pittsburgh's screwing everything up right now because they're good and their pieces aren't available right now as they were at the start of the season. But where are the additional options? Where do they look to? Do they look to the bottom? Do they look to Calgary? Do they look to Nashville? Do they look to, who else is near the bottom? And can you vulture in and try to make that type of a move by plucking away some of their top guys? Alternatively, is there another option? Like, I wonder about St. Louis. All this talk of, and we've talked about it. We talked about Braden Shen. We mentioned, Justin Falk on the back end.
Gordon Kyrou getting the healthy scratch.
Yeah, and Kyrou, Kyrou's an interesting one because it was message sending to the team as well as message sending to him.
Yep.
But they've been more than willing to listen on Kyrou in the past. Around the draft, they talked to Montreal. They talked to, I think it was Ottawa. They talked to Seattle. They talked to a variety of different teams about Jordan Kyrou. And I wonder, with the way he plays, does New Jersey want to explore that option, or are other teams going to kind of explore those types of options? So I think I think Fitzgerald is going to cast a bit of a wide net here to see what his options are available to him, and then determine, all right, we've got targets A, B, and C. That's going to result in these types of additional moves that we're going to have to make. This isn't going to be. This is going to be a scientific type of re-engagement for them in terms of getting involved in the market. But I'm curious to see where they go, and I'm curious to see how these other teams react to some of this, like the Blues.
27 years old, got a cap hit of 8.125 until 2030, 2031. Full no trade clause for Jordan Kyrou until the last year of that deal. Obviously, a move would have to fit, and you'd have to be okay with it. That's first and foremost. If they said something. So it's interesting to hear that they're listening, and it may be just not working out too well. Okay, before we finish this, and before I want to ask you what you want to get off your chest, are we inching closer to a NHL version of Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis deal? Like, is there ever going to be something that big at some point? Yeah, right?
I hope so. I hope, and I think because of so many free agents or pending free agents re-upping with their teams, the free agent market, at least now, and we'll see if that trend continues as the cap continues to go up, but it gives teams more flexibility to do that, to hold on to their own guys. Because of that, we're going to see a less sexy free agent market because so many guys have re-upped. And I've been wondering about this. I'm glad you brought it up. We didn't even talk about this in the rundown or anything. Not bad, buddy. I'm really wondering about those types of moves. Like back in the day, there was one crazy. There was like Shanahan and Primo and Coffee, and like there was a huge those caliber type deals where it's not just a 1-for-1. It's like multiple type of pieces involved. I wonder if we're starting to get back to that, and that was way back then. But I wonder if we're getting back to that now, because teams that want to make those impact moves or just to shake things up and swapping out talent for talent, well, we may legitimately start to see that in the not too distant future. Because when you're talking about guys like Dougie Hamilton, and you're talking about guys like Jordan Kyrou and other, quality young pieces, even Naz Kadri, with Calgary, they're not going to just give him away. That's going to be a substantial. You're going to have to almost overpay to get him, to pry him out of Calgary. So I wonder if we're starting to get into that trend, and man, I hope so, because those are fun to talk about.
Okay, well, the other one that would interest me is obviously the Kadri deal and the big one in that way. But do you get a sense of something bigger because an acquiring GM doesn't want to sign a superstar player for an 8-year extension, and when that kicks in and that changes to 6 years, how much of that is going to have to come into consideration with the new CBA?
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. You're talking about max terms. You're talking about guys that may not want to be there, that are restricted. Look at I think the last big one, I forgot about it, was Matthew Tkachuk. Tkachuk, Hubert O'Weger. And there were a couple other pieces, but those were the big guys. They moved him because he wasn't going to sign there, or didn't want to sign there long term anyway. So, do we get it enough? And I'm sorry to bring it up, but is this what we're going to see next summer with Quinn Hughes? Is that going to be something that we're going to potentially look at from that perspective? Or another player, another big time pending RFA that's like, you know what? I don't feel comfortable being here long term. Nothing against you guys, just my own thing. I'll sign a 3-year, then I'll get to UFA status. You guys figure out what you want to do in the meantime. It wouldn't surprise me to see more of this again, because other teams that are looking to fill their roster with impact type additions, they're not going to have that, because let's say argument's sake, we go into the summer with Artemi Panarin, Alex Tuck, and I'm blanking on some other names, but even if those are your top 2 UFAs, it's only 2.
Yeah.
That means 30 teams are going to have to look somewhere else for those caliber players. I didn't mention Kempe because I do think he's staying in LA, but like, let's say there's two or three prime target, like Nick Schmaltz is number 3. So you got 29 other teams that are just sitting there going, well, I guess we go to plan D.
Yeah.
Like, and plan D probably is trade. And we'll see those bigger type of moves, as things kind of progress. The other thing too is I think some of these teams and some of these managers are going to have to recognize the fact that that trade market is shifting, and it's going to take a lot more to now do those types of big impact moves. You've got to be a little bit more comfortable taking those types of risks, because you mentioned the NBA deals. Like, those are blockbusters. They're crazy.
I mean, GMs get fired because of it, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. As we saw yesterday. So, but you've got to be able to take that. You've got to be able to start taking those risks. Maybe they're a lot more calculated, but you have to be able to start to start incorporating those options in your game plan. And it makes things a little spicier around the National Hockey League when we see these big ass deals that are taking place.
Yeah, you mentioned Quinn in the summer. If things keep going sideways for the Quinn Hughes and the Vancouver Canucks, it may be before summer where something may pop up and you say wow, and you say wow to you. Finally, one of my favorite parts of the show. What do you want to get off your chest, my friend?
Well, a couple other things. Anaheim, I mentioned briefly about them potentially going big game hunting. I think they're going to be lurking and just part of that conversation because it's almost time for them. But they've got 2 guys that are going to eat a boatload of salary and part of the cap next year in Leo Carlsson and Cutter Gauthier. Zellweger is also an RFA in the summer. My understanding, just on those fronts, very loose conversations. I don't think the negotiation process has fully started. They may have had some discussions and talks before the season got going and then just kind of dialed it back. Nobody's worried about anything. Obviously, but the way that especially those 2 guys are playing in Carlson and Gauthier, they're going to eat a good chunk of their cap moving forward. And I'm curious to see what those numbers are, especially the way, really both of them. Like, the way Carlson has played, and he's 25 points on the season right now.
Stud.
You are looking at 8 figures on an AAV for this guy. I don't know where Gauthier fits into that. I think under that, but I mean, the guy's been scoring at will. So those are going to be interesting numbers by the end of it when they do settle into a new contract. But no rush on either side for either player, is my understanding, as well as Zellweger. And they're having those conversations, but it's very, very loose. At least that's my understanding right now. So interesting stuff in Anaheim. I know we touched on this last week, but Boone Jenner in Columbus, I think. Yeah, he's a UFA at the end of the season. He's got a sweetheart of a cap hit, ridiculously great guy in the room, glue kind of player, and that energy force that Stanley Cup teams are going to want come trade deadline. If there's no extension by whatever, and after the Olympics, or maybe even sooner, depending on how aggressive some teams want to get, and depending on where Columbus is in the standings, there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to line up to try to pluck Boone Jenner out of Columbus. With some of the young kids that they've got, Fantilli's starting to come into his own a little bit. They're having some discussions on an extension with him. They've got a few other guys, Sillinger's, Chinnikov, obviously, but he still wants to change the scenery. So they're figuring that out still. But Jenner is going to command a lot of interest. And you know how supply and demand works. It's going to be I suspect, a pretty interesting return if they do go in that direction. But there are teams that are looking and wondering, when is it time for us to kind of pluck and pry him out of Columbus and get him out of Ohio? He likes it there. I'm sure he'd like to stay, but with the way the team is going, it may be too good to pass up, depending on what the offers are going to be. But he's going to be a hot commodity if they stay in this position and they don't start talking contract.
David, great stuff as always. Let's get to what I like this weekend, as it is a presentation of Bet365. I'm looking at the schedule for Saturday night. All right, hear me out. Original 6 matchup. Boston Bruins, Montreal Canadiens. Love the Habs all day long against the Boston Bruins. Winnipeg Jets on the road in Calgary. Give me the Jets once again all day long against the Calgary Flames. And finally, a team that we just talked about here, the Detroit Red Wings, once all day long at home to the Buffalo Sabres. This is a presentation of Bet365. Whatever you bet's never ordinary. Download the app, get in on the game, use code NATION. Bet365 must be 19 or older. Please play responsibly. David, thank you so much for this. Great insight as always. I'm looking forward to catching up next week on this as well.
Me too, buddy. Good talking.
Hey, hockey fans, if you enjoyed that video, then make sure you hit the subscribe button right here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. We have you covered for everything you need. Exclusive interviews on The Sheet with Jeff Merrick, all the latest hockey news on Daily Faceoff Live, and you can always get your morning started with Johnny Lazarus and Colby Cohn on Morning Cup of Hockey. Don't miss a minute. Hit that subscribe button.